Okay, so why don't we get started for tonight? And we're going to continue the stories, continue talking about the brief history of the Dharma Masters. And we should be able to finish tonight and then take a break. But in the meantime, we'll start by doing our opening prayers. So we'll just do short prayers. So if it's okay with everybody, I'll just recite the short refuge prayer and the and the four measurables. So we start on page 5. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, we take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki chonamla, shangju bardu dagni kapsuchi, dagi jinsoki pe sonamgi, drola penshir sangye jupasho. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Manam kadam yam pesam shentam she dewa dang dewe gurdang dempa jorchi. Dognal dang donal gi gudang drawa jorchi. Dognal me pe dewa dang mi drawa jorchi. Ne ring chak dang ni dang drawe tang namla ne pa jorchi. Okay. Thank you very much. So, just as a quick review, we've been talking about the history of the Dharma Masters, which of course began with the Buddha Shakyamuni. And the gift of the Buddha Shakyamuni was to be able to show us the way of cessation from our suffering. So there have been many Buddhas that came before Buddha Shakyamuni, and they taught about suffering. They talked about the Dharma, but they didn't give a cohesive way of being able to practice the Dharma to be able to liberate oneself. So Buddha Shakyamuni, his genius was to be able to devise a system by which he taught his method for doing that. So this is what we've been following all these years. And then after him came the Emperor Ashoka, who came and began to kind of institutionalize through the government, through his empire, the Buddhist practices. And then we saw that around the turn of the century of coming into the modern time, around the time of Christ, when the new calendar came and so on, was the teachings of Nagarjuna, which was the teachings of the middle way, the teachings of the Mahayana teachings. And then we had many masters who we still celebrate and still read. And much of the philosophy that we read today comes from this period the middle way teachings and so on, where these the Mahayoga was developed, and the Kriya Yoga was developed, and so it was the mind-only schools that was developed, and the details that they went into. So it's very philosophic. So we can read about that. We can study about that. And then around 700, 800 AD is when the Buddhism moved into Tibet. And this became the groundwork of the Vajrayana, of the Tantra teachings, the practices to become the Buddha. So the Mahayana teachings were to be liberated by way of recognizing the two truths, recognizing the way of the middle way. But now with the Vajrayana, now we're talking about actually becoming the Buddha, and the mindfulness that is developed as a result of that. So that really began with Shantatara Rashita, was the great scholar who went to Tibet, and then he suggested that Padmasambhava come to, because he was a great siddha, a great Mahasiddha, to come and to be able to dispel all the negativity, all the confusion that was being in the way of people being able to accept the Buddhist practices and the Buddhist teachings and so on. So Padmasambhava came and wrote many books, the Dharma books. These were hidden treasures that were discovered when people were ready to hear them, when people were ready to practice them and so on. So we've received the benefit of many of those, and maybe there's more that we haven't discovered yet, that hasn't been discovered, but nevertheless, the ones that have been very, very important. So when Padmasambhava was in Tibet, he was the school of Buddhism that came out of that was called the Nyingma tradition, and this was the teaching of the masters, teaching of the ancient ones, it was said, and this became a school that still is existent, still being taught, and so on, and is very wise, very powerful. And much of the Tantra teachings, the Tantra is a Sanskrit word that literally means continuum, that there is this continuum that we see ourselves as part of. And this Tantra is Tantrayana, or the Vajrayana, this indestructible path, this continuous, indestructible path, is the way of the Buddhas. And the Buddha is all within ourselves. So it's a matter of recognizing this Tantra, this continuum within ourselves. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to transcend our human nature, which is pulling us back with all this, conceptual ideas, letting go of that so that we can recognize this Buddha nature that we have within ourselves. So the Nyingma really celebrates that and teaches that very profoundly. Out of that came the Kagyu tradition, which is what our particular lineage is, a Kagyu lineage. So we're going to explore the masters that brought that. And these masters, these were the what we call the blessing lineage. This Kagyu lineage is called the blessing lineage. Up till now, we've had this lineage of aspiration, of wanting to be liberated, wanting to be free, wanting to be the Buddha, and so on. And then there was the action lineage, those beings who really engaged in practice and would go off into the mountains and into the hermitages and would practice these very serious and devout purification rites and so on, to be able to liberate themselves from attachment in the Mahayana sense. And then the Kagyupa, the Kagyu, were the blessing lineage, because here was a lineage of yogis now who had accomplished a great deal of realization. And now they began to teach and be able to bestow this realization on their students. So this was very powerful. And many people would say that just by meeting one of these great masters, their blessing would lead one to become enlightened. So, so whether or not they still have to study, whether or not they still have to practice, we can call it a question, but there definitely is a power that we can recognize, that we can see by meeting these masters. And they are alive today. There are some great masters. As a matter of fact, Garchen Rinpoche is considered to be one of these great masters who has realization and who has been able to bestow his blessings on beings and lead them to enlightenment. So there's those who would say that we all have enlightenment, and by meeting these masters, we recognize that enlightenment in these masters, and we recognize it within ourselves. And that's only one piece of the process, because the other piece is we need to make that stable within our lives. So in other words, we all have enlightenment. We're all capable of that. We have it within ourselves. We have to recognize it. Then we have to sustain it. We have to live an enlightened life. So this is where the realization masters really, really make a difference, because this is where ordinary beings who are on the path can see that what it takes to be a bodhisattva, what it takes to become a Buddha, what it is to be like that, what it is to live like that. So this is the great gift of the Kagyu lineage, the blessing lineage, or the realization lineage. So the essence of this is Vajradhara. So if you've got the outline that I sent, this is version 3. So this is the last one. It's got everything in here that we're going to be talking about. And so I'm on page 7, which is talking about the Great Kagyu Masters. And this starts with the primordial Buddha, Vajradhara. So first we have to understand this absolute nature that is so pure it's unborn. So this is that which we all recognize as our true nature. This is called the indestructible Dharma holder. This is Vajradhara. So there's images of Vajradhara that are anthropomorphic, that look like human beings, but this goes beyond being a human being. And so it's this essence of our true nature is within ourselves. And so he takes on these different forms. He's been giving these different forms so that ordinary beings can kind of wrap their minds around what this means and recognize that human beings can have this nature. So he is of Dharmakaya nature, which is the true nature, the truth body, but he also emanates as Sambhogagaya. And many of his illustrations, his images are the Sambhogagaya images, where he's wearing the clothing, the robes of a monastic and so on. He's wearing a headdress, which is showing his the 5 Buddha families and so on. And he is representing this all-pervading good. He's representing this perfect nature that we have within ourselves. So his name means he whose beneficence is everywhere, that his goodness is everywhere. And that, so he represents the experiential content of the Dharmakaya, the experiential, the realization of that, and then becoming that. You have to experience it to understand that there's no way to be able to vicariously grasp what it means. You have to experience it. So he is the protector who teaches all the Dharma. He's the embodiment of the wisdom, of the essential sameness, of this essence of equanimity of all of us. And through him, we learn the path of devotion as expressed in the different tantras, and in this case, the Havajra tantras, where it says the co-emergent wisdom that comes from the physical body, from the intellectual, and from the spiritual body, all coming together, which cannot be expressed. It can be found nowhere. It can only be realized through ultimate devotion to the Lama and through one's own collection of virtue. So it's an experience. It's something that we have to realize through our purity by removing all the negativity, all the confusion, at least enough to get these glimpses. And then through seeing these glimpses and continually working on that, purifying those glimpses, then we develop these visions where we recognize this true nature is within us. So this Buddha nature is within us, is what this is explaining here. And the second is the Uttara Tantra says. The Uttara Tantra is the wisdom of the Buddha. And this is the ultimate meaning of self-arising. The ultimate meaning of self-arising will be realized through devotion, through our devotion to purifying ourselves, to recognizing this within ourselves, to allow this to come up. So we take on teachers to help us to do that. The teachers can be the non-objective teachers who point out to us when we are in error. And sometimes we need that, so the Lama can be that. After a while, we develop that ability within ourselves. We become the Lama who has this wisdom, but also recognizes when we're moving off the path and so on. So this is the ultimate meaning of self-arising will be realized through this devotion. Devotion to the Lama, devotion to the Dharma, devotion to oneself as this nature is within oneself. This is the light radiating sun, which cannot be seen by him who has no eyes. So this is a interesting sentence here. The light radiating sun cannot be seen by him who has no eyes. So what this means is that by seeing with these eyes, if we're looking to see with these eyes, we'll always miss it because we're too absorbed with the phenomenal nature, with the material nature. But if we have no eyes, but we see with our heart mind, this is where that radiating sun is. This is that radiating light, the clear light. So it cannot be seen by him who has no eyes. So we have to see with this true nature through this devotion, through this practice. So the teaching, which can be realized through aspiration, devotion, and which cannot be described in written words, is transmitted only from ear to ear, from heart to heart. So I've explained many times, about the empowerments, that one of the main characteristics of the Vajrayana are the empowerments. The empowerments are these instructions, is this blessing that we receive from the Buddha through the Lamas, through the Vajra Master, through the one who is bestowing the empowerment to us. And we're taking refuge, we're saying prayers, we're learning characteristics about the visualization and so on. And then we go on and we do the mantras of these deities that are being explained to us, these different aspects of the activities of this Buddha nature, which is being given to us, bestowed on us by the Vajra Master, by the Lama, by these great teachers. So they are talking to us. We're hearing them. We can see them. They're giving us the blessings and so on, and we can absorb them through our brain and so on. But at the same time, they are transmitting this devotion from their hearts to our heart. And the empowerment is to not just hear it, but to be able to open up our heart to be able to receive that. That this is the unbroken transmission from the Buddha. From the Buddha is the primordial Buddha, from Vajradhara, coming from Vajradhara through all these lamas, through all these great teachers into our heart and so on. And then we begin to recognize that as we begin to practice what it is to be the Buddha. So it's not only from ear to ear, but it's from heart to heart. So the empowerment is a very critical part of the Vajrayana practices. So it's part of the ritual of doing this. So this blessing lineage was given by Vajradhara to Tilopa, who gave it to Naropa, etc., and continues on in our lineage. All the Buddhas of the three times and all the Kagyu Lamas are the emanations of the Lama glorious Vajradhara. Vajradhara is mind, and his consort, Vajradhari, is the body phenomena. So these are some very important parts here. So what we're describing is this process to be able to recognize that which is beyond comprehension. It has to be experienced. When we experience it, it's ours. We are it. We become that experience. We still are unable to express it because it's inexpressible. There's no words that can consume it all and be able to partake. What we can do is we're guided to it, and we can guide others to it in the same way. So all the Buddhas of the three times and all the Kagyu Lamas are the emanations of this Lama Vajradhara, this primordial Buddha. Now, we say that there is this female or this feminine aspect to this. So the male aspect is the skillful means in being able to be able to do this, to be able to recognize this and so on. The feminine is the wisdom aspect of this. And the wisdom is represented here in the phenomenal nature, that the female is representing this phenomenal nature. So the two come together, the wisdom and the compassion, the wisdom and the skillful means coming together, the two truths that we've talked about a number of times and we will talk about more. But this is the essence of the two truths. There is this phenomenal nature that's represented by the consort of Vajradhara, who is Vajradhari. And they are in this embrace. And he represents the skillful means, he represents the compassion of this to be able to bring this to us and to be able to convey this to us. So it's something very important to keep in our minds, to keep in our awareness and see and be able to start recognizing this if we haven't recognized it already. So it's with this, all this, now this has to become manifest. This now has to come out to us. So it first comes out in this lineage with Tilopa. Now, of course, I just have to remind you that when we do our dedication prayers at the end of our teachings that we have, and if you have your book and you look at page 18, and here it says that this dedication is the lineage dedication. And it says, Dorje Chang, Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, MIlarepa, Dharma Gompopa, Phagmodrupa, and Lord Kongpa. These are the lineage lamas who we are about to understand a little bit more. Dorje Chang is the Tibetan name for Vajradhara. So it's the same, just Vajradhara is the Sanskrit name, Dorje Chang is the Tibetan name. So it's a lineage now of masters who had disciples who became masters, who had disciples who became masters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, so Tilopa now is the first of these earthly, if you will, human beings to recognize this primordial awareness, this primordial state, this primordial being within themselves. Tilopa was born about 1,000 years ago, and he was born to a wealthy family in India, and he was recognized from his very, birth as being a great being. He had marks of a god, marks of a great human being, and a Buddha even, by the scientists of the time, the astrologers and so on like that. So he was recognized as being somebody very special, and he took monastic vows. He was raised in the traditions of the Buddhism at the time, and he went to cemeteries. He liked to go to cemeteries to be able to practice and to receive teachings, because this was a very charged place, a cemetery, very charged with energy and so on. So this is a known place for these great beings wanting to go to be able to practice, because it really compels us to develop and maintain our mindfulness, our one-pointed mindfulness. Otherwise, we would be, kind of always concerned about what's going on around in these cemeteries and so on, and being pulled away by negativities and mental misconceptions and evil spirits and things like that are said to be there by those who are superstitious. So this is going beyond superstition. Superstition is just, manifestation of confusion. It's just created in our own minds. So during this time, he would have visions of his connection to the Dharmakaya. Talking about Tilopa, he would have these visions of his connection to the Dharmakaya. The Dharmakaya is the truth body, is the mind of the Buddha, this primordial Buddha. He felt this strong connection that was very powerful to him. He traveled to Udayana. Udayana was now away from where he was born, is up in the region of where Pakistan and Afghanistan come together. And this was the land of where Padmasambhava came from, Udayana. And he received many Dharma teachings and realizations. There were many caves there, and many Mahasiddhas, great practitioners, came from that area. So he went there. He wanted to go there. And in particular, he developed this teaching, or he recognized himself as Shakrasamvara. Shakrasamvara is the wheel of bliss. And he saw himself as this Shakrasamvara, this wheel of bliss. So he saw, this circular nature of the wheels going round that we've talked about many times. And he recognized this within himself. And this was, revolutionary. This was brand new to many, many people. This was something that he had visions of himself, and he began to teach. So he renounced his monastic life because this went beyond everything that he had known before. They were teaching all this aspiration and all this action stuff and doing practice in this very parochial way of being able to ascertain enlightenment. Now he's broken free from that and says, I don't need that anymore. So he renounces the monastic life. He lives in a cemetery and became known as the Great Renunciate, that he put aside everything. He was basically naked, maybe wearing, you know, some kind of a loincloth or something like that, maybe not even that. And he was just eating, you know, entrails. He was eating whatever he could find in the cemetery. You know, so many people were totally repulsed by him. You know, that someone could do this, and why they would do it was a complete mystery to those people. But to him, it was the purest way in which he could sustain himself. So after many years of living in this way, he attained Mahamudra. He attained enlightenment. He attained the awareness of what it is to be completely liberated and pure. So he recognized himself as Shakyamuni, as Vajradhara. Shakyamuni, Vajradhara are just emanations of each other. So during this time, what he was doing these different practices. He was bringing these practices together, and he unified these tantric systems, these continuum systems that were the wisdom teachings of the mind of the Buddha, to be able to do that. So he would spend long periods of time just in deep meditation, samadhi meditation. So this is how he was living. This is Tilopa. He didn't have very many students, didn't have any friends, didn't have any family that would come to him. He was by himself in this way. However, he did have renown. People knew about him. So now comes Naropa. Naropa comes, you can see the dates here, 1016 to 1100 in the Common Era. And he represents the four aspects of the life of the great saint Naropa, the heart son of Tilopa, is what we're going to look at here. So these four aspects of the life of Naropa are these: the outer aspect, the inner aspect, the secret aspect, and the ultimate aspect. So the outer aspect is enduring the hardship of searching for the outer prophecy. He is recognized as a proper vessel. The inner aspect is enduring the hardship of the inner practice. He reveals the meaning of the signs. The secret aspect, enduring the hardship of offering the cherished body, he kindles the light of bliss. And the ultimate aspect, enduring the hardship of obeying orders, he achieves the result. So here's Tilopa. Here is this real pure being. And here comes Naropa, who is this scholar, we're going to see in a minute, is a scholar now who is kind of like, he formulates the institutionalization of what Tilopa is the embodiment of. So these four aspects are characterized. There's an outer, inner, secret, and ultimate. So I'm going to keep on going on here, and we can go back to this later. You can go back later on and study this, but right now we don't have enough time, to dwell on this. I want to paint a picture for you. So this outer aspect is this proper vessel, and he's born as a king, as a prince, and so on. And he's persuaded to go into the monastery. He goes into the monastery and he becomes really, really great. And there are these gates that are in the monastery, and people would approach the gates, and there would be these great debaters that were the monastics that would be at each one of these gates. And the people coming in who want to enter into the gate would have to meet the debater and would have to be accepted by the debater. These people will be coming because they think that they're going to dominate. They're going to change this monastery. They're going to change these people, and so they have to debate to be able to bring their philosophy together with the philosophy of the monastics and so on. And Naropa was considered to be the best of the debaters. And he was in the Northern Gate. He was a Northern Gate debater. He was so good that he was made abbot of Nalanda University. Nalanda University was the best place to be a Buddhist, was the greatest of the schools and so on. So he became great. So now the interesting part is he meets this old woman of 32 ugly signs. I'm on page 9 here, about in the middle of the page. So this old woman makes her way into the monastery and goes to Naropa and says to Naropa, she says, do you know the words of the Dharma or the meaning of the Dharma? So she's asking him, do you know the words of the Dharma or do you know the meaning of the Dharma? Big difference. So Naropa replies, I know the meaning. And the old woman started to cry. She started to weep. So then Naropa laughed and said, well, I know the words of the Dharma. And she laughed with joy with that. In other words, he was correcting himself. He was saying, no, I don't know the meaning, but I do know the words. And then she recognized that as being truthful, and then she became happy. And then she says, and then Naropa says, who understands the meaning of the Dharma? And she replied, my mother. So here's Naropa, the greatest of all the scholars, admitting that he doesn't know the meaning, but he's saying, well, who does know the meaning? You know, how can you ask me such a question? Who knows the meaning? And she says, well, my brother does. So Naropa requested that she take him to her brother. And she said, you must pray, you must meditate, and you must search. And then with this, she disappears. So whether she's a vision, whether she is a dakini, whether she is a real person, you know, it doesn't matter. The point is that here he's questioning himself. Does he really know the meaning of the Dharma? Or is it just the words of the Dharma that he's been studying that he thinks he knows? And that, you know, but is he the embodiment of this? Does he really know the meaning of this? So he realizes that he has to go find what she is saying to him as her brother. So Naropa recognized her and her 32 signs as auspicious and gave away all his treasures, his books, and all his other belongings and declared, now I will search for the perfect guru. So he's looking for someone greater than himself. And Naropa was beseeched by the other 3 gatekeepers and all other teachers of Nalanda to remain with them, but he refused. So they're trying to pull him back. They're trying to say, hey, Naropa, you know, you're great here. We need you here, that you have done great work. You have, taught us all, and you need to stay here. And he's saying, no, he says, there's something else that I need to go do. So now he takes off on his search for the brother who he'll find out is Tilopa. So in a dream or a direct vision of messenger dakinis, Naropa heard the name of his sought-after guru as Tilopa. So he continued his practice of Chakrasamvara while on his journey. So he was practicing Chakrasamvara too. Naropa was. So he goes through these different hardships during his practices of duality, pride, ego, samsara, purification, desire, realization, appearances, thoughts, killing, devotion, death. These are things that we've talked about so many different times in Buddhism 101. So he's going through these mental, machinations of trying to reconcile what he's dealing with here. He's trying to go for something that is beyond all this, but all these thoughts are still coming to him. So many other purifications to finally meet Tilopa. So the 4 explanations to realize the superior qualities. So he has to understand non-returning. He has to understand the explanation of the Yidam deity. The Lama has to explain the disciple as a proper vessel, and Naropa himself explains the self-liberated one. So he's dealing with all this. This is his breaking through all the dogma of the time. So this inner aspect is the practices where he's opening the maturing path, empowerment, kindling the light of the liberation path. He goes through the secret aspect of the cherished body, the blazing light of bliss, the stainless light. This is all stuff during the deep meditations that he goes through and so on. And the ultimate aspect is disobeying orders, directly achieving the realization of the fruit, receiving the prophecy of the Lama. And so this is all the stuff that now he's traveling, he's taking with him all these things he's thinking about, and he finally meets Tilopa in this charnel ground, in this cemetery. And he finds this very poor looking person, who is living off of entrails and basically naked. And he realizes him as his teacher. And Tilopa has him go through these different hardships that are being characterized here. And he's doing it just through the mode of living with him. He's not giving him teachings. He's not telling him to do things so much as he's challenging Naropa's sensibility of what he thinks he can do. Naropa's thinking, wow, I used to wear really beautiful robes. I used to have a really nice room in the Nalanda. I used to have a really good place. So he's questioning all these things, and he's going through these challenges of living like this, like Tilopa, to be able to do this. And then Naropa starts challenging his sensibilities. One of the greatest things that he did that I remember in the story was that they come to this like cliff, this precipice, and down below the ground is 20 feet or 30 feet below or whatever, and something like that. And Tilopa says to Naropa, he says, well, can you fly? And Naropa, takes this as oh, I should be able to fly. So he jumps off of the cliff, expecting to fly. And of course, he falls to the ground and hurts himself very badly. Tilopa comes around and says, well, can you fly? He says, I didn't mean that you could fly like that. He's talking about, can you fly through your meditation? Can you fly through your samadhi? Are you bound by just being a human being, or are you unbounded by liberating yourself from being a human being? And so it was things like this that Naropa was purifying by being with Tilopa. Tilopa was just being very literal about things in a spiritual sense. And Naropa just wasn't quite ready for that. He didn't know how to expect that. He didn't know that this was happening, And there was a point where Naropa was being so stubborn that Tilopa just got, I don't know if he got frustrated with him or something like that, but they say that, Tilopa just took a shoe and just threw him at him, says, what's wrong with you? Just to show him his disgust at how Naropa was holding on to these grasping of ideas of who he thought he was and so on. So finally, through Naropa now breaking off and leaving Tilopa and going off into his own, was he able to attain the ultimate aspect of the realization of the fruit of his spirituality practice, receiving the prophecy of the Lamas. In other words, that he himself would become Buddha. So he attains this, and now he becomes, the embodiment of the Buddha. He recognizes this within himself, and he begins to take in disciples himself. And he teaches what are called the 6 yogas of Naropa, which were actually the 6 yogas of Tilopa that Naropa was teaching to him through their lifestyle. Not that they were prescribed teachings, but it was just through living with him that he realizes these 6 yogas from Tilopa, and he begins to teach them, and they became known as the 6 yogas of Naropa. So among these teachings this 6 yogas are Tummo. So Tummo is this body heat, creating this body heat that sustains one in the midst of all hardships and so on. And it's through this heat that we are able to transcend. It becomes we're burning the fuel that allows us to transcend. So that's the Tummo. The illusory body is as we transcend, as we become transcendent, we take on this illusory rainbow body that is beyond our physical aspects. It's a rainbow body of light. It's an illusory body of light. And the clear light luminosity, that he recognizes this clear light like the light of the sun that is lighting all the darkness. If the sun wasn't there, everything would just be dark. But this luminosity, this clear light luminosity that he is illuminating, that all the Buddhas illuminate. It's not his exclusively, he is part of that. And then the dream yoga. The dream yoga as part of our waking consciousness, our bardo of living, where we experience dream, where we go into the bardo of reality with involuntarily. We are exposed to that involuntarily. The Tummo and the illusory body, all that is done through practice, is done through meditation. But the dream yoga is done involuntarily. So we appreciate that. Then next is the Poa. The Poa is the transformation of consciousness. That when we die, we transfer. We have to eject this life force that came to us, that we came when we were conceived by our mother and father, and we as if you will, an entity, all came together, and then we formed this life force that stays with us our whole entire life. And that when our body stops functioning, this life force has to be ejected. So this Poa, this transference of consciousness, comes in when we're born, but we have no real direct control over that. But when we die, we do have control over that. So that's one of the 6 yogas of Naropa, is learning how to control that. And then the bardo is understanding what the 6 bardos are. So the 6 bardos are the intermediate stages of our nature. So we live in the living bardo, the bardo that now we're living, we've got this human body and so on. And in this bardo, we have the bardo of dreams, which is this involuntary windows into what we call the bardo of reality. So in the bardo of living, we experience this bardo of dreams, this involuntariness, but we also can experience the bardo of meditation, which now is controlled, that we can control our mindfulness to go into this bardo of reality. So those are 3 bardos: the bardo of living, the bardo of dreams, the bardo of meditation. Then we go through the bardo of death. The bardo of death, when now our body stops functioning, and now we have this very compressed, very charged intermediate state, that now we are passing from this bardo of living into the bardo of reality. And we have to be able to be in control of that. And this is a great gift that we give to ourselves. We give ourselves the gift of life, to have this human body, to have this human life, to have this time to be able to understand these things, to purify ourselves. This is a great gift. We give ourselves this life. But then we have this great gift of our death, of now shedding all of that stuff, all that suffering, all that confusion that came along with this life now, and taking now what is this purified spiritual self to the bardo of reality. So the bardo of reality now is where we realize all this has been here the whole time. We just didn't recognize it. And we see the spiritual nature of all things, what we call spiritual nature, that is beyond our conception. We're using these words, but these words are just, conventions that we can, try and apprehend a little bit of what we're trying to convey to each other here. But this bardo of reality is beyond all that. And this is the bardo of the Buddha mind. This is, being there without any any volition, any attempts at mastering. We either become that bardo, or we are unprepared to remain in that bardo, and we want to have a body again. We want to be born again because we're not pure enough to remain in that freedom. It is pure freedom. It is liberation. It is freedom, unlike any freedom that we know now. So, it's characterized in the West very much, in traditions where they say, oh, when you die and your soul goes and meets God, and if you are not able to stand in front of God and be able to present yourself, you cower away from the great power of God. You cower away from the great light that is coming from God, from that power. And because you're not able to stand that, and you want to, so you leave. You can't stand being that pure, so it's characterized in many Western traditions that way, so either you become that light, the same light as what would be characterized as the God, you become that light, you become the God, or you cower away and you say, I need to be born again. I want to be born again. I want to have a body. I'm not ready for this kind of freedom. So you begin the process then of moving from this bardo of reality into the bardo of becoming. And you go through these challenges, which these spiritual beings are there trying to help you to remain in the bardo of reality. That through the compassion of these Buddhas, of these enlightened beings that are trying to help you to recognize your true nature and to be able to stay within that bardo of reality. But if we can't meet those challenges, we just continually spiraling downward now until we have to be born again. And we choose the way in which we're going to be born. We choose whether we're going to have an egg birth, whether we're going to have a heat and moisture birth, whether we're going to have a womb birth, or we're going to have a miraculous birth. So we talk about this in other sessions, but so due to our karmic winds, due to those things that we have developed over our lifetimes, this wind that is moving in this direction that is preventing us from recognizing ourselves as the bardo of reality, we are carrying away, and we go through this bardo of becoming now back into a body, being determined by what our karma is. And then finally, we have the bardo of rebirth. And then we're born into whatever manifested form that is necessary for us to find some kind of grasping that we were looking for, you know. So it may be that we are looking for something that is there to help other people, other beings. And we see that, yes, we were in the bardo of reality, but we have some work to do. And our work needs to be in the terms of being able to help other people. And by helping other people, we're helping ourselves to purify, so that the next time around, then we go into the bardo of reality. Now we are better suited to be able to remain in the bardo of reality. So these are the 6 bardos. So these are the teachings of Naropa. Any questions or comments?
Lance, many of us may have known people. I know I have known. I've known at least one person and known of others. I think we've all heard of people who have apparently died, and some who have been believed to be clinically dead, and have, for want of a better word, come back to life. The person I talked to a long time ago said that they died. They knew that they had died, but they were in a place of profound peace and light and serenity and happiness. And there was no aversion, nothing to scare them that they recoiled from, and they started coming back to life, and they did not want to, because wherever they were was a place where there was nothing but peace, no thinking or worrying, just profound serenity. And then they came back to life, but it was not.
Yeah, so what's the point?
The point is, are they in the bardo of death, or where are they when that happens? Because
okay, I got it. They're in the bardo of death.
Are they?
And whether or not, you know, how they move from there, you know, their body, their physical body may be dead. They're not breathing. Maybe there's no discernible brain function that the scientists can read, but there still is this inner breath. We have this inner breath. And this inner breath is indicative of that true nature, of that life force that we have. So that is still active and still within the body. And that's what has to be, that's the transference of consciousness. So until they're ready to do that, there's all these, you know, blissful things. And the scientists will say, oh, well, this is the hippocampus and all this kind of stuff. And you know, I don't know too much about any of that. But nevertheless, once we give up, once we release that inner breath, then now you go into the bardo of reality.
Is that a choice that you make, or is it just something that...
It's a preparation. Either you make or you don't make. Now, you know, in our, you know, in the way we look at this is we've died many times and we've been born many times. Now, I know this is controversial and we can talk about it, but we've been there many times is the point. Where were you before you were born? Where do you go when you die? And here we say we all go to the same place, the bardo of reality. Now, we don't have a brain. And the brain is where all the memory is. So if there's no brain, there's no memory. We have no memory of that. All we have is something we call love that comes from this, that we take with us. So I'm not going to go into a whole long story about this right now, but we've all experienced this before. So so that's the answer to your question, is what they are experiencing is the bardo of death. And there are these changes that happen when the blood is turning into the flesh, and the flesh is being consumed by the heat, and then the winds are coming and shifting around in the body and so on. So there's this whole progression that happens. And if you know anybody from who work in hospice, they'll talk to you about these things. You know, and it's one of the things that when you go into hospice, they talk to the dying person about. They explain this, you know, that here are the phases of what death is. And once it begins, it's irreversible. You know, now I know there are mitigating circumstances, certain things can happen and so on. But nevertheless, that's what is being talked about. Now, in the bardo of reality, it's said that there are 49 days, 7 weeks in that bardo of reality. And during this time, it's like, you know, there's this churning of things, spiritual things that are happening, and whether or not we are prepared for that. If we're not prepared for that, then we might immediately want to be born again. And with no control over how it is that we're born, only by our karmic winds. But if we are more developed, then we have our karmic winds, but we also have a means of being able to know how to guide those winds and so on. So we learn that through teachings that came from Padmasambhava, from the Bardo Todal, the liberation by hearing in the intermediate states, what it is to be in that state. And it's quite awesome to learn that and so on. So whether it's true or not, you know, in our sensibility, whether we can say it's true, you know, it becomes a point, of just opening ourselves up to these things, and then seeing that it's more than just this bardo of reality. It's the bardo of living, that it teaches us how to meditate. It teaches us what our relative life is. So if you can take that meaning out of these teachings, it's very powerful. So whether there's an actual hell realm, whether there's an actual hungry ghost realm, whether there's an actual, you know, God realm, all these things are, you know, spiritual in nature. William, are you saying goodbye?
No, I was trying to say that this is where our desires pull us through. If we desire to go beyond and come to a place where we're learning more about what is it, the Buddhist, when we want to learn more about the Buddhist teaching, and that our desires carry us through. If we have, pardon?
Aspirations?
Yeah, and if we have a desire, and we get, you know, we die, and our desire is to come back because of chocolate pudding or something like that, you know, that'll suck us right back into our life form here.
All right, well, forgive me for this. Forgive me for cutting you off, because we have a limited amount of time. And tonight we're talking about the Dharma Masters. So I'm trying to give an overview of, what these teachers brought to us. And then we can talk about the subject of their teachings, when we have more time and so on. So there's books and books and books and books, lifetimes have been spent on every one of these studies and so on. So I'm not trying to minimize it by any means, but I do want to, create this context in which we see how this is working, because we come back to this context all the time. So all this was the teaching of Naropa that came from Tilopa or someone like that. So next is Marpa Lotsawa. Now, Marpa, so up until this point, everybody's been Indian. Everybody's been from India. Now, Marpa was born in Tibet, and he was a great scholar, and he learned Sanskrit language, and he learned Hindi language, and of course, he learned Tibetan language. And Tibetan language was still in its formative stages as being written. So he was known as the translator. That's what Lotsawa means. Lotsawa means the translator. So he was Marpa, the translator. So he would go down into India to go get teachings from the masters down there. And he would meet Naropa. He began to meet Naropa. He met Atisha, who we talked about briefly last week, and so on. And he was getting these teachings, and he would get them in their books, and he would bring them back up to Tibet, and he would translate them. And then he would take on students of his own and so on. So he was getting these texts, the 6 Yogas in Naropa, the Mahamudra texts. He married. He wasn't a monastic. He married, and there's some details here about things. And he was sustaining himself through the benevolence of his benefactors, but also he had some land, and he was farming the land. And he had, some of his students, and he would hire people to farm the land for him, and then he would live off of the proceeds that came from that. But his main function, what he was trying to do, was to be a teacher. So he takes students, and he has, this vision of the Kagyu school. At this time, these other teachers that came before him were just doing their thing, and they didn't have they didn't have the vision that maybe Marpa did. Marpa knew that there was going to be this Kagyu school that was coming, and he was preparing people for this. So his last visit down there, he saw Atisha and he saw Naropa, and so they were his teachers. So he's bringing back their teachings to Tibet. Okay. Now we come to to MIlarepa. Now, MIlarepa, there's a lot to be talk about MIlarepa, but generally he's considered to be the saint of Tibet. And the reason for that is that he became a black magician who killed people. And I'll tell you the story a little bit. And he wanted to redeem himself. He realized that he made a terrible mistake by doing this. He wanted to redeem himself. So he sought a teacher who could help him to purify himself. And he sought out Marpa. He was directed to Marpa, and he sought out Marpa. So what happened with MIlarepa is, very briefly, that he was born into a wealthy family, and his father died young when MIlarepa was a young boy, like maybe 10, 12 years old, something like that. And he had a younger sister, and his mother were left. And all the money that and property and so on that his father had left to him, he left to the father's brother and his sister, as their executors. And they basically stole the money from Milarepa and his mother and his sister and enslaved them to be their servants. And they had no choice in this. They lived in a small village, and the uncle was powerful, and he had, an entourage of people who supported him. And so they had no choice. So when he got a little bit older, and the mother went to the uncle and said, look, now it's time, we got a will, and that my husband said that we were supposed to have this money, and Milarepa was supposed to have this money, and it's time to do it. And the uncle says, I don't have it anymore. We used it up to support you. That's what you needed to be supported. When we were taking care of you, it's all gone. Of course, which was a lie. So she then says, okay, and she influences Milarepa to go to black magician school, to learn to be a black magician, to come back and to be able to take revenge on the villagers, and in particular, the aunt and uncle. So Milarepa, is a young boy, he's maybe, his teenager, something like that. And he does, because his mother tells him to do it. And he learns these spells. He spends a number of years, learning this. And he comes back, and make a long story short, he creates these hailstorms and these terrible earthquakes, and things start to happen. And part of the village is destroyed, and the house that the family lives in, that the uncle lives in, and everything is destroyed, and they're killed, and so on. And then he goes back yet again another time, and those that were still living, he kills the remainder of those that were killing and everything, and he makes all this great suffering to seek revenge for his mother. And with that, he feels terrible. He feels like he did a terrible thing. And the villagers that were left start chasing him. And they chase him into this, this monastery. And he hides away in this monastery for a day or two. And while he's there, he's sleeping there, and he gets these visions. He gets these, he connects with what is the spirits that are in this monastery, and he sees that there is a way out of this to purify himself. So he leaves there and then starts looking for someone who can help him. So the monk who was there directs him in this one direction. He goes to this one monk, and the monk works with him for a little while and says, oh no, he says, you need more help than I do. You need to find Marpa Lotsawa. So this is all in Tibet. So you need to find Marpa Lotsawa, because he knew that he was a powerful practitioner who had these great teachings and so on. So Milarepa finally finds his way to Marpa. Marpa is having dreams that Milarepa is coming to him. So there's a synchronicity of things, and Marpa's wife is having dreams, and so there's all this great significance. So Milarepa comes to him and says, I need you to teach me how I can purify myself. And Marpa realizes that he's still got a great deal of arrogance, Milarepa, that he still is full of this, black magic power and so on. And he knows that he has to be purged of this before he can do anything to teach him. He's got to break him of his arrogance. He's got to make him humble. So he says, okay, he says, I'll teach you, but first you got to build me this stone house. And he describes this stone house, and he's got to do it all by himself. And it takes a year or something like that to build this house. And Marpa comes out and says, oh no, I told you to build it here. I don't want you to build it here. I want you to build the house over there. Take this house down, tear it down, and then put all the stones back, and then carry them over and build the house over there. And So MIlarepa says, you told me to put it here. He says, don't argue with me. You want me to teach you. This is what you got to do. So MIlarepa goes and does it. And then he comes and builds, and he gets halfway through the second house. He's building it in a different way. Marpa gave him instructions to build it another way. And now Marpa comes to him and says, oh, no. I'm sorry. This is in the wrong place. I want you to build it over this direction here. So, MIlarepa's crying. Why? It took me 2 years to get to this point. He says, oh no, he says you move it over there and that'll be fine. So now MIlarepa takes it apart, takes the stones back, and then has to move them back over to this third location. And Marpa comes up and says, what are you doing? He says, well, you told me to build it. He says, oh, I was drunk when I told you that. He says, what are you doing this for? He says, oh no. He says, you got to tear this down and you got to build it over there. So fourth house he's got to build. And this time he gets some help because the other students, the other disciples of Marpa are feeling really sorry for him. And MIlarepa asks some help from some of these students to move the cornerstone, this big stone in the cornerstone. And Marpa finds out about that and he gets livid. What do you mean? You got to build this all by yourself and so on. So after finally finishing this 9-story last house, this fourth house, it's a tower. And believe it or not, it's still standing in Tibet. He builds this, and this is when Marpa says, oh, you got my students to help you. I'm not going to help you. You wanted their help, let them teach you or something. So MIlarepa is just completely fractured. He's just despondent. He says, I'm going to kill myself. And with that, some other things transpire, but with that, Marpa really feels like, okay, he broke him. His arrogance is gone. Now he's a proper vessel for the teachings. So he takes him into his monastery, and he begins to teach him the practices and the Dharma and the things that he needs to learn to become a yogi. And so after a period of time, then MIlarepa leaves Marpa and he goes up into the caves by himself, and he perfects all these teachings. He becomes enlightened in this time. And he goes from being a rich person in the beginning to becoming a slave, to becoming a black magician who kills many people, who then becomes a saint, who learns how to become a Buddha. And he attains enlightenment in a single lifetime. And he takes many, many, many students. And he's invited everywhere he goes. He goes into the villages to teach and everything. And when he goes, they invite him in, and they would have these great feasts that are called Ganachakras. And these Ganachakras, they would have these great feasts. And then at the climax of the feast, people would stand up and they would sing songs, and there'd be celebration and so on like that. And MIlarepa would give these teachings that he would sing. And these are called the 100,000 songs of MIlarepa. And so embedded in these songs were these great, realizations and so on. And they're revered today. And there's a book of, learning these verses, which are magnificent. If you want to know what it is to be a yogi, that's the book to read. So he's taking on students, and he's revered today as the saint of Tibet, illustrating that even anybody can become enlightened in a single lifetime if you have the devotion to do what MIlarepa did. So Milarepa had many students, and he had a heart son whose name was Rechungpa. And Rechungpa was a very good student, but he was also a bit lazy and a little bit of a maverick, a little bit wild. And he would test everything that Milarepa was teaching him. He would go off by himself and he would do things on his own, and he would cavort with women and things like that, and he wasn't keeping pure, he thought that he was beyond that, he was transcendent. He hadn't purified himself, so he was still stained by those cavortions that he would have, and so but Milarepa loved him as a heart son and tried to really help him and so on, and he couldn't break through Rechungpa's lazy ways and desirous ways and so on. But then he had another student, Gompopa. Gompopa was a great physician of the time, a doctor. And Gompopa had lost his family. His wife and children had died in some kind of a epidemic or something like that. And he was very despondent and decided that he would go into the monastery and devote himself to the Dharma and take with him, whatever knowledge of medicine that he could, and use that as a means to be able to help other beings in the monastery, while in the monastery. So so it really wasn't a monastery, forgive me. It really wasn't a monastery because Gompopa didn't have a monastery. He was never a monk, or rather Milarepa, but he winds up with Milarepa and as a disciple and so on. So Milarepa takes him on and realizes his great intelligence and his ability to be able to read and write. And he says to Gompopa, he says, you will be my Dharma son. He says, because you will be the disciple who will carry on the lineage from this time forward. And he gave Gompopa the job of writing the book that was bringing together all the different traditions, the Kadampa traditions and the Nyingma traditions, and what was becoming the Kagyupa traditions, all together in one book. And this became the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. This is a Lam Rim book called The Stages of the Meditation, or Stages of the Path. And so this is the formative book that then all the other traditions in Tibet, all the Buddhist traditions, use this book as a template to write their own books for their own particular lineages based on this and so on. So very, very powerful. He wrote other books, Gompopa, and he became known as Lord Gompopa. He then became a monastic, and then he had his own monastery, very famous and so on. So then he had many students, and one of his students was Phagmodrupa. And Phagmodrupa was a very devout monastic from the very beginning. He was a young boy. He was very devout. Excuse me for getting lost in my thought there. And he seeks out Gompopa because Gompopa was known to be this great teacher now. And he's learning now this blessing lineage, because the Gompopa now is bringing together the blessing lineage of Milarepa and of Marpa and of Naropa. So they're recognizing this as there's the aspiration lineage, there's the action lineage, and now there's this blessing lineage. So Phagmodrupa was looking for this. And so Gompopa gave him the teachings and so on. He grew up with Gompopa, and then went off and founded his own monastery, which became the biggest monastery of the time. And it's said that he had 500,000 monks came through his monastery during his lifetime. And he had many, many students, and they went off and practiced uh, they would go off and form their own lineages and so on. So he institutionalized now the yogic ways now became part of the monastics. And it was accepted that the lay people and the monastics were at equal levels, that they all could attain enlightenment, that it wasn't that one was more special than another. So Phagmodrupa is supporting all this. And then, so this goes on for years and years. And then Jigten Sumgon now became a student of Phagmodrupa. And Jigten Sumgon is the founder of our lineage, the Great Kagyu. So Phagmodrupa had many students. There was Dagba Drupa, there was Phagmodrupa, well, that was his name. Well, they're written down here. Excuse me for not, I'm not trying to read this. But anyway, he had many students. And some of those lineages are still in existence, but the Drikung lineage is still in existence, and for a long time had become the most powerful of all the lineages in Tibet. Jigten Sumgon was a lay person, and he started off by just going into the caves by himself, up above Phagmodrupa's monastery. And he spent many, many, many years there and had many, many visions and so on. And he would come down for periods of time, and he would come into the monastery and meet Phagmodrupa. And Phagmodrupa would give him some teachings, and he would go back off and back up into the up there. But he was having incredible visions. Jigten Sumgon was having these incredible visions, and he was really refining his knowledge and so on. And he wrote many books, and so he became the formation of the Great Kagyu. When Phagmodrupa passed away, then they asked Jigten Sumgon to be the head of the monastery, of Phagmodrupa's monastery. And he declined that. He says, no, he says, I want to remain a lay person. But after a period of time, he relented, and he became a monastic, but not until, but then he moved away from Phagmodrupa's monastery and formed his own monastery in Drikung Til, in the village of Drikung. And that's where he stayed there. So here, these next pages in this outline, page 14 and 15, are all these many details about Jigten Sumgon, because he had a very well documented life. Many of these other beings, it wasn't well as documented, but with Jigten Sumgon, it was very well documented. So many, many things here, and it's very impressive. So you might want to spend some time taking a look at this to appreciate who he was and what he did. So I'll just end by just saying a couple things, just to pull a few things together here. That on page 16, the last page, it says, Lord Jigten Sumgon composed many texts and practices. So the essence of the Mahamudra, or the essence of the Mahayana, the middle way, the Gong Chik. The Gong Chik is the single intention, very pith instructions that go right to the heart of being able to be a yogi. The supplication to the seven Taras he composed, which is something we've been studying with Khenpo Samdup recently. Very powerful, very profound, very great teachings. And you can, the teachings of the essence of the Mahayana and the Gongchik teachings are on YouTube if you want to devote yourself to those teachings, many hours of that. And then many deity yoga sadhanas, many deity yoga practices, Lord Jigten Sumgon composed that we practice today. Many of the prayers that we recite today were composed by Jigten Sumgon. The Parnasavari practice that we do right now, because of the epidemic, was composed by Jigten Sumgon. So many other rituals and practices to dispel negativity and suffering. They say that during his 70s, by the time he reached 70 years old, he had had 180,000 disciples gathered in Jigten, and many were sent into retreat, that he sent them into all different places around Tibet to do great practices, like in Mount Kailash and Lapshi, Snow Mountain, Sari, and other holy places. And then he passed away at 75 years old. And he dissolved into the Dharmakaya of the Buddhas, the ultimate state beyond. So here's something, so just these terms, the way they put this together. He dissolved into Dharmakaya, which is the mind of the Buddha, the true nature, the truth body, the ultimate state of beyond the holy purity. The ultimate state beyond the holy purity, beyond the holy pristine wisdom, beyond the holy bliss, and beyond the holy self, and remain there until the end of samsara. So truly, into that bardo of reality that we have all been to, that we are here now but don't recognize, because we are so consumed with our grasping of our appearances of phenomenal nature that we are consumed with this phenomenal nature. And until we can separate ourselves from this phenomenal nature, or rather that we can bring this phenomenal nature onto the path and purify our attachments to it, that's the right way to explain it. We're not separating ourselves, separating from it. We are bringing it onto the path and seeing what it is for what it is and purifying our attachment to it. Then we begin to realize our true nature, our Buddha nature, that is beyond all concept of everything that is displayed by any of these other books and teachings and so on. So this is the very brief history of the Dharma Masters.